punishment in the school context and the later kind of fetish was established clearly quite early on.
But the theories of the late 19th century added another dimension to all this, and were quickly taken up by the early campaigners against corporal punishment.
There's this argument that, well, you are getting pleasure from cruelty, but of course you may not be aware of it consciously. So this makes people very, very uneasy. There's this notion also that sexuality is not something necessarily innate, that sexuality can change, it can be confused, it can be perverted by outside forces. And corporal punishment is one of the ways that you can actually pervert a child's sexuality.
Ideas about the effect of corporal punishment on psychological makeup may have been part of some of the earliest abolitionist campaigns, but it took until the late 20th century for such ideas to really take hold.
One very important reason why corporal punishment went out of fashion was the link that's increasingly being made between physical pain and psychological pain. And increasingly those two things are tied together. So in other words, the infliction of physical pain is not only bad in and of itself, but it is also bad because it creates psychological pain. And that notion of the psychological self, the inner self that can be harmed by these external things impacting or happening to it is a very, very modern phenomenon.
By the late 70s, there were well-publicized cases of children refusing punishment, often with intimations of psychological harm.
I've been away from school 4 weeks nearly 4 weeks. I was meant to go to a detention, but I kept on avoiding it because I knew that I'd already done it. But they wouldn't have that, so they was going to give me the cane. So I told them no. Because every time I do have it, I get ill and I end up taking tablets and that. The pills I'm taking are Valium to calm me down because of my nerves. I kept getting nerve rashes. Then I'm hardly eating at all. I've lost 2 stone since June.
I always know when Susan's been caned, when she comes home from school, because she's in a very distressed condition.
A medical view of pain had come to dominate, something to be cured and alleviated. The notion that a little pain might help form the character seemed outdated.
Once the underpinning of corporal punishment, with the idea that it does good to the person who suffers, passes away, it is very hard to find a clear rationale for beating children in schools. It begins to look simply like sadistry when one person beats another.
Corporal punishment would finally be brought to an end in British state schools by a case that emerged in Scotland.
In Edinburgh a few years ago, they tried to keep a record of how many times the strap was used in a term. They got to 10,000, and after that they stopped counting. With the staggering frequency of beating in Scottish schools, unjust excesses inevitably occur. Mass beltings of whole classrooms. A 7-year-old strapped for opening a door for a teacher, something only monitors were supposed to do.
When 2 boys refused to be beaten and were suspended from school, their parents took their case to the European Court of Human Rights.
The judges at Strasbourg ruled that to allow any form of physical punishment against the wishes of the parents was a violation of human rights.
But the result wasn't an immediate ban on corporal punishment in Britain.
The government's decided corporal punishment should continue in English and Welsh schools, but new laws will be passed to enable parents to insist that their children aren't beaten. But the government's opponents say the new laws will create confusion and injustice in the classroom.
There was indeed confusion. So much so that in 1986 a bill to completely abolish corporal punishment went to the House of Commons.
The government doesn't really know what to do about it. This is a Conservative government in the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher is Prime Minister. In the past, she's declared herself in favour of judicial flogging. She's in favour of hanging. She's not going to lead a government that's going to abolish corporal punishment in schools if she can help it.
It was a free vote, and it could not have been closer. 230 MPs voted to retain corporal punishment in state schools. The number voting for a ban was 231. The change in the law was partly thanks to the royal family.
More or less everything is now set for the marriage of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. A short time ago, Miss Ferguson...
There was a royal wedding taking place the next day between Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. And a number of MPs, I believe about a dozen MPs, were actually sort of held up because of the crowds queuing to get a good place. And about 12 Tories claimed that they were held up by the crowds and they couldn't get there. And also, even Mrs. Thatcher wasn't able to vote against abolition because she was entertaining Ronald Reagan's wife.
Corporal punishment was only outlawed in independent schools in 1999. And today, the debate goes on over smacking in the home, the only arena in Britain in which corporal punishment survives. Over the past 200 years, there have been many arguments in favour of corporal punishment, but in Britain, these ideas have slowly been pushed aside.
Certainly, the side that says you should not hit have won the day. There's no question about that. They have definitely won.
The fate of a 2005 legal challenge by religious schools confirmed the prevailing attitude. The schools argued corporal punishment was an expression of religious belief. But the House of Lords ruled that the right to hold the belief does not confer the right to act on that belief. Legislators have reacted to the views of psychologists and campaigners and responded to the changing notions of childhood, crime, and human rights. But have we really changed?
I think we are more squeamish, understanding, watchful, better informed society. And we don't have alibis like religion, for example, to justify the violence upon other people's bodies. But we're still the old Adam. We're still the basic, primarily curious, violent people, I think, that our ancestors were.
For many people in Britain and throughout the world, the arguments that once justified corporal punishment are still valid. So could it return?
It would be quite impossible for corporal punishment school beatings to come back, partly because of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is now enshrined in British or English and Welsh and Scottish law.
I cannot imagine a return to corporal punishment in our society because it has been increasingly delegitimised. Now, that said, I have to say I was sort of hesitant because, of course, I think most people would have said that about torture. Most of us would have said not that long ago, a few years ago, that it was impossible to consider that torture would come back in the Western world. So, as an historian, I think we never want to say never.
Human rights laws may make this behaviour effectively unlawful today, but laws change. There may be more to come in the history of corporal punishment. To challenge your views and learn more about the justice system, go to bbc.co.uk/justice and follow the links to the Open University.
And part 2 of Crime and Punishment, the story of capital punishment, is here on BBC4 tomorrow at 9. Next tonight, stay with us for comedy to see us out with 2012.
They say she never